All right, everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent. Welcome to part 5 and the final segment for this conversation between PBD and Jeffrey Toobin.
No. You mean Brett Baer?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought Brett Baer did a very good job.
I agree. I think Brett Baer did a great
very
job.
good job.
And you know how he said, this person got fired. That person got fired. This person got fired. Why do you not have a good, hire? So he asked a tough question. And then,
Right.
hey, why is it that you're keeping on to it? They were trying to get it from you. Well, I wanted to first make sure. Okay, so guess what? People want to know. Great. But people want to also know with the Corvette back and with the notes, what you had there is with Biden. People want to know as well. People want to know.
And there is an investigation going on Biden. Yeah, absolutely.
All I'm saying to you is people want to know. We want to know what's behind the truth.
So one of the purposes of this series is to understand some of the language tricks, some of the rhetorical tricks, as well as some of the political and as well as some of the narrative tricks. Some of the things that you might see played out on a micro level in an individual conversation are played out on a macro level within society. And that's something that we should pay attention to as well. Because again, if you have a body or an organization that's operating in good faith, then you can trust it. You can respect its decisions. You'll be more likely to follow their guidance, et cetera, et cetera. But if there's an organization or a group of organizations that are trying to deceive you, trying to trick you, trying to manipulate the people or the systems around them to their own end, not to the public benefit, we should be aware of that because that is a major danger to us. Here's a reference to something to pay attention to. One of the oldest tricks in the book, particularly in politics, is if one of your guys, someone you're allied with, someone that you politically support, if they're in trouble, well, start up an investigation because you need to investigate that person. If they might have been misbehaving, we should definitely investigate them. We should be zealous about investigating them. We should investigate them for as long as possible with hopefully someone friendly in charge of that investigation so we can control the information that comes out of that investigation, so that we can control the timing of such disclosures, so we can control the timing of its conclusion, of the way that its findings are messaged out to the people. This is one of the oldest political tricks in the book, is if there's a brewing controversy, launch an investigation with someone who's friendly to the person being investigated or neutral or controlled in some way. And then you can regain control of a measure of control of the situation where you position yourself. Here, Jeffrey Toobin says, yeah, if Joe Biden has been mishandling classified information, that should be investigated. That gives him, as an ally to the Bidens, conversational ammo to make it look to a less interested third party that everything's on the up and up, that we're acting with integrity. But in reality, if that investigation is a sham, if it's not actually digging into the meat of things, if there's no risk of getting the Bidens in trouble with it, it's not really an investigation. It doesn't accomplish the same purpose that a lay person might assume when you say there's an investigation ongoing. We've had a stream of politically motivated investigations over the last 10 years or so. If you look at, just in fairness, since we've been talking Hillary Clinton, if you look at Hillary Clinton, the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton was a politically charged investigation. The timing of the investigation, and I know we're kind of going in the Wayback Machine, but 8 years ago? Yeah, give or take about 8 years ago. If you'll recall, there was a big kerfuffle where she was being investigated by the FBI to decide whether any charges should be brought. And basically, about 2 weeks before the election, if I recall, I'm going off memory here, the FBI Director Comey came out with the determination that basically said there was some misbehavior here, but we'll call it negligence. And he kind of described the relevant statutes in a way that isn't really how the statutes are written, but basically said, in our determination, there's no reason to pursue charges here. And then a week later, we find government secrets on a laptop that Anthony Weiner was using to send sexually explicit images to and from minors. Anthony Weiner was the husband of Huma Abedin, who was Hillary Clinton's chief aide. So effectively, you have this laptop that pops up like a week before the election, and the FBI reverses itself and says, we have to check this out. We have to investigate this. And they reopen the investigation, and it weakens at the last minute. It weakens Hillary Clinton's credibility. And there are some that argue that that was enough to tip the election to Trump. So in all fairness, this cuts both ways. But then we've had the Mueller investigation and the Durham report, and now we have special counsels and U.S. attorney generals that are indicting Trump and investigating him and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So it cuts both ways. But it's interesting to me that in this context, Jeffrey Toobin is more than happy to claim and say, oh yeah, we should definitely investigate Biden. Most of the time, these kinds of politically sensitive investigations don't really have teeth. They don't really go the way an investigation would go if it was coming after you or me. And so if you're someone who's a proponent of kind of that leftist media narrative, you expect that the leftist bureaucrats that are going to be running this kind of politically sensitive investigation aren't really going to go after your guy. So you can take the high road and say, yeah, we should investigate him, but also be pretty confident nothing's going to come of it.
The comment about the fact that I'm not an I'm not the expert, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm totally get it. The element of that approach, when you say something like, well, you're not the expert in this and you're not the expert in that, there is a very clear, pompous, elitist message behind that. Like, just like this week when MSNBC and CNN, well, we know the president is talking right now, Jake Tapper and Rachel Maddow, but we know what the president is talking about. We are not going to let him have any airtime, and we're going to update you on whatever he says that's necessary because we know he's going to tell lies. I'm sorry. Do you think I'm a moron? Do you think I don't have a mind for I can't make, what the hell?
Sorry, PBD. They think you're a moron. There is an argument to be made that there are people in the media who have the opinion that the American people should not receive information directly themselves, that the information should be filtered through trusted, respectable sources, and the pertinent pieces packaged together nicely and presented to you in such a way as to help you understand the proper way of looking at that information. That's a terribly dangerous way of looking at information as it flows through society. But yeah, it's built on the idea that there's a big chunk of the American populace that shouldn't see the raw, unfiltered footage.
Hell is America all about? You just said I'm a moron. That's what you just said to half of America. Hey, America, you're a moron. You can't think for yourself. That's why you need me, because I went to this elitist university called whatever, Columbia. I don't know where Rachel went to. And I know what's best for you.
And the interesting thing is this actually cuts both ways if you look at it, because not only do you have a group of the media and in government that say, by virtue of our expertise and credentials, we should be the ones to package this information and present it to you in a proper way. We're going to tell you what to think politely. We think you're morons, so we're going to help you understand how to think about these things. That's the point PBD is making. It's important to note that there's a chunk of the population that says, thank you. It's way more difficult to try and analyze all this stuff myself. You go ahead and you just give me the Cliff Notes version. I'm going to just go ahead and absorb what you tell me to absorb. And they willingly embrace the narrative, the packaging.
Guess what? I don't like that. That's why I left Iran. There's a reason why we don't live in Iran for 10 years. 10 years old when I lived in Iran, we went to Germany at a refugee camp for 2 years. Then we came to America because I want me to make the stupid decision on who I vote for, not you. Let me make the stupid decision of voting for Biden or Trump.
And that's the ideology split we've been talking about in a nutshell. A reliance on experts Or, no, I'm the one that's going to make the decision. Right, wrong, foolish, wise, whatever. I'm an American. I make my own decisions. It's important we have both of these perspectives, but they are definitely antagonistic to each other. You can see he rarely gets heated, but you can see he's pretty heated on this point.
There's a part of that where when we say, I'm not the expert, you're not this, well, no, you're a smart guy. That's why you're here. You're not a regular schlep off the street that doesn't know what. You've been involved in a lot of different things I've investigated. All I'm saying is for us to take the approach as well to say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't have this. You don't know what you're talking about. No, we're here because we don't know everything, but we're here to question things and say, this kind of sounds a little fishy. Don't you want to know about it? I do. Well, no, let's just live in the future. Forget about the past. No, I don't want to do that.
I completely agree that, everybody, that we don't have tests to determine whether you're entitled to express an opinion on a subject. Well, the only point I was making was that.
So as a trained lawyer, he thinks about his words very carefully, and I'm just trying to parse Jeffrey Toobin's response there, because PBT just made a pretty impassioned response, a pretty impassioned point about how the American citizens should receive the full information and make their own choices. And I think he was pushing back on a comment earlier that Jeffrey Toobin said, where he basically, he's an expert, but he's not an expert on this one thing, whatever. It's kind of that classic two-step dance that a lot of experts do, where they say, believe me because I'm an expert, but if this isn't my area of expertise, I'm going to couch it a little bit and give me a chance, a bit of rhetorical retreat to say, I'm going to make a case as though I'm an expert, but I'm not really an expert. So if I could push back on, I can take a step back. I'm not sure if I understand Jeffrey Toobin's response. So give me a second. Let's listen to that again, see if we can parse it.
About it, I do. Well, no, let's just live in the future, forget about the past. No, I don't want to do that.
I completely agree that, everybody, that we don't have tests to determine whether you're entitled to express an opinion on it.
I agree that we don't have tests to determine whether or not you're entitled to express your opinion on something. By saying I agree, it sounds like he's restating PBD's position. But I'm parsing what he just said, and I don't find any of that in what PBD said. There's a mismatch here. Sounds like he's trying to, once again, reframe PBD's point to something a little more cogent to his perspective. It's honestly kind of a non sequitur. Let's see where it goes.
On a subject. Well, the only point I was making was that there are certain scientific questions, like the source of COVID, that it really does require some considerable expertise in the subject in order to have a reasonable opinion about it.
So I'm remembering a little bit now of kind of their back and forth where it's coming from. I think he's managed to frustrate PBD. Because when he came to COVID and they were pushing him on COVID, his response was, I can't tell you where it came from. I'm not an expert enough to have an opinion on the source of COVID. And so PBD is basically, because we're tying into accountability for past decisions. And frankly, I think it's an evasion, because one, they weren't asking him to determine where the source was. They were asking him about the way the media was treating the conversation around the origin. And now he's, again, it just feels slimy and evasive to me. But we're going to let it roll and see where we go.
That's the only point I was making, and I'm not saying that, I mean, what is more than legitimate is you or Vinny or anybody saying we need an investigation of the source of COVID. Mm-hmm. That everybody, that's a perfectly legit in the subject in order to have a reasonable opinion about it. That's the only point I was making, and I'm not saying that, I mean, what is more than legitimate is you or Vinny or anybody saying we need an investigation of the source of COVID. That everybody, that's a perfectly legit.
Right.
But the ultimate question of what the source of COVID is, I want to rely on people who know something.
And who's leading that investigation?
Yeah, exactly.
Who is? I don't know.
That's my fucking point.
and-
Where's this investigation of
no,
COVID?
and I go
They'll
and-
investigate laptops and leaks and this and that.
No.
But something that shut down the world for 2.5 years, no investigation. What is happening?
Adam, China runs, bro. If China could fly spy balloons over our entire country, over nuke bases, and nothing happens, nobody's investigating shit. But here's my thing.
Which is
No, but
absurd.
here's my thing, Jeff. And I'm not an expert. Nobody in here knows shit about epidemiology, right?
Right.
But guess what? It doesn't help when the experts were trying to talk and the government was silencing them. When Peter McCullough was trying to talk, when Robert Malone was trying to talk.
When the experts who don't agree with the political truth, when they don't agree with whatever the consensus position is, whatever's most politically convenient, those experts are silenced. So you cannot simultaneously say, let's look to the experts to give us input on this. And then when you have people with expertise who come up and say, my conclusion is not convenient to your political agenda, they get silenced. That's a problem. That's a big problem. Good point, Vinny.
They banned them on YouTube. They took them off Twitter. How do we even have a chance? How am I supposed to learn from the experts when they were shut down? And now it's years later, and now we're like, it's old news. No.
Right.
Again, accountability, and that's why I had the thing with Joe Rogan. He wants to have that debate with the bring a scientist.
Dr. Peter Martell, you following that story?
I am following.
So
What do you
guess
think about that?
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I mean, I actually am sympathetic. If you want to have a scientific debate, have two scientists debate it.
This is an interesting thing where, again, he's misstating the position. So let's get a little context because they're referencing something maybe you're aware of, maybe you're not. Joe Rogan, famous podcaster, smart guy, also a fighter, interesting guy, big into alternative herbal supplements. He likes drugs. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, great guy from all that I can gather. But one of the things that I like about him the most, and what a lot of people like about him, is that he wants to have conversations. He thinks that the conversation between interesting people discussing controversial, intense topics is worth having. So he will bring people on to have the tough conversations. So he had the Twitter CEO on back when it was Jack Dorsey, and they were talking about censorship, and Jack Dorsey kind of blew smoke at him. And to his credit, Tim Pool called him out and said, Joe Rogan, you didn't push back. Maybe you didn't have the expertise, but there's problems here. So Joe Rogan had a follow-up podcast where he brought Tim Pool on, he got Jack Dorsey back, and Tim Pool pushed much harder on Jack Dorsey because that kind of censorship in the public discourse is an important topic that needs to be addressed. So in light of all this, you may or may not know, but we'll just go back into the history machine. Joe Rogan got COVID, and it was bad. And as part of his personal treatment regimen, his doctor said that he should take, I forget the name, but it's the horse dewormer stuff, ivermectin. It's called the horse dewormer stuff because in the veterinary supply, it's used as a horse dewormer. But there's also formulations of it that are dosed and designed for human consumption. His doctor prescribed him ivermectin, and he took it, and it helped him feel better, or so he says from his report. He talked about taking ivermectin, and the world exploded, because how dare he contravene whatever the public health position was at the time during the middle of COVID. They didn't want people taking ivermectin for whatever reason. So he's been mixed up in this kind of COVID controversy for years, and he's willing to push back on the establishment. And again, he wants to have these key conversations. And so there's a very friendly to the regime, Dr. Hotez, I think, talks a lot of smack on social media about how everyone needs to basically just follow the CDC, follow the World Health Organization, just do what you're told, sit down and shut up, basically. He's kind of a cheerleader for that side. And Joe Rogan said, hey, will you come onto my podcast and have a debate about these things that you're saying? Because I think what you're saying is dangerous and wrong. I think your ideas need to be challenged and debated. And Dr. Hotez says, no, I won't come. Now, Vinny brought it up and said, why don't we have this debate? Get two scientists on and have a debate. Here you have Dr. Hotez on one side, perfect. Let's get another expert, someone who knows what they're talking about with epidemiology, bring them on and have a debate. Here's the interesting thing though. That proposal, which was just said, let's go back, let's do it again.
Shit about epidemiology, right?
Right.
But guess what? It doesn't help when the experts were trying to talk and the government was silencing them. When Peter McCullough was trying to talk, when Robert Malone was trying to talk, they banned them on YouTube. They took them off Twitter. How do we even have a chance? How am I supposed to learn from the experts when they were shut down and now it's years later and now we're like, oh, it's old news. No,
Right.
again, accountability. And that's why I had the thing with Joe Rogan. He wants to have that debate with the bring a scientist.
Dr. Peter Hotel, are you following that story?
I am.
Bring a scientist to this conversation. Scientist and scientist debate. Hosted, moderated, if you will, by Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
So
What do you
guess
think about that?
Yeah, what do you think about that?
I mean, I actually am sympathetic. You know, if you want to have a scientific debate, have two scientists debate it, not Joe.
And that's the crux of this. Now, once again, he's restating what was just said incorrectly. He's saying, I have sympathy to Dr. Hotez. He doesn't want to debate Joe Rogan. He doesn't want to debate RFK Jr. As a podcaster or politician, you should have one scientist debate another. When one side is saying, please have a debate, and the other side is saying, no, we won't have a debate because it needs to be scientist versus scientist. That's what they're asking for. But you cannot get someone who is pro-vaccine, pro-authoritarian regime on an open, unstructured debate platform with Dr. McCullough or Dr. Malone or whatever to debate the merits of the science. They won't show up. My question is, if you're unwilling to debate, doesn't it kind of look like you're hiding something? Doesn't it look like maybe you think your ideas aren't going to stand up? Seems a little sus, as the kids say.
I don't want to do that either,
No,
though.
RFK.
But Hotez doesn't even want to debate two expert scientists that are on the opposing side. I understand the argument
Yeah.
you're saying, like, why should he debate RFK? RFK is
Yeah.
not fine. Okay, that's a reasonable argument. But why don't you get a couple other experts from the other side who want
totally
to
for
debate?
that.
Yeah,
Totally for that.
then I
think
respect that.
That's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not in that involved. I just having people who know something about it should debate, but you know, I shouldn't debate.
No, of course.
You know,
Well,
those-
Jeff,
He realizes that the other position is that PBD is putting is very reasonable and cannot be contested. So he says, no, I'm totally fine with that. I shouldn't debate him. What? No one's suggesting you debate him. Again, he's trying. He agrees to diffuse the circumstance, to diffuse the tension, to say, yes, I agree with what you're saying. And then he undercuts that agreement by returning to his original position, saying we shouldn't have a layperson and an expert debate. No one is saying that except for you, but you keep coming back to it, which makes me think that A, you're either unconvinced and you're just saying, I agree to let the conversation move on, or B, that you have a narrative that you have to hit, that you won't be convinced because you're trying to push a particular way of looking at things. That the narrative is, why should we have Dr. Hotez debate a non-expert?
Jeffrey, why do you
I don't know
think
anything about it.
Yeah.
America wants to see this debate, conversation, dialogue for sure? Whether it's RFK or Malone or McCullough, and then versus a Fauci or Dr. Hotep, fill in the blank. In your non-expert legal opinion, Why do you think this debate has not happened? Why has it not occurred yet here in America?
Well, it is happening. I mean, look,
Where?
look, we're having
Where?
this conversation.
No. But none of us.
You can't be this obtuse unless you're trying to be. All three of these gentlemen on the PBD podcast are trying sincerely to say America wants to see a debate between experts on this topic in order to come to a proper scientific conclusion about the right way to move forward. And the response is, oh, we're having that debate. That's happening in America. Where? We're talking about it here. The fact that he said that says, oh, it's totally fine if a bunch of non-experts talk about COVID. That's substantively what we're talking about, except I'm also elsewhere in the conversation saying, in fact, 2 sentences ago saying it should be people with expertise on both sides of this issue talking about it. But that's not happening. We have lay people talking about it who are not experts, and that's good enough. Like, you just undercut what you said 20 seconds ago. Nobody this smart is that dumb. So the obtuseness has to be with a measure of intention.
Us are experts. I'm talking experts.
There are scientific papers being published all the time
Not
about
a debate.
COVID.
That's
That
not a
is
debate. No,
That
it's
is
not
a debate.
Yeah, how many scientific papers have you read recently?
I haven't read it,
Zero.
but I mean, that's-
nobody's reading that.
but that's-
People want to visualize and see
You're
debate
saying like
just like this.
doctors debating with a camera on? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I mean, yeah, like a debate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not scientific
Fauci and
papers.
Musk, Fauci and Malone.
Not scientific papers.
I think you will. There will be, given the level of interest in it, there will be plenty more discussion on this subject among people who know what they're talking about, and that's a good thing.
I hope.
Except that so far, what we're seeing is experts, frankly, on the left, experts who are friendly to the authoritarian COVID regime, the Dr. Fauci's of the world and all the acolytes, they go on friendly media sources and they get softball questions, or they talk amongst themselves and they don't get seriously challenged. And when someone comes along to seriously challenge them, the social media, the mainstream media, the tech giants, the government, etc., does everything that it can to squash those challenging consenting voices, even when they're coming from experts. I think at one point, Governor DeSantis, I think he hosted a panel to discuss COVID policy, and he had epidemiologists on, I want to say from Yale, Stanford, and like Oxford or something crazy. Credentialed, serious academics. And if I recall, I'm pretty sure that video got pulled. I'll have to look at that to be sure. But it was definitely, there was pushback on that. Even though you have an elected representative of the people, therefore credible voice, someone who has a reason to talk about COVID policy, someone setting COVID policy, asking for a panel discussion from epidemiologists who have expertise in academic credentials. And even that is not embraced as part of the conversation because the conclusions drawn were not friendly to the regime, not friendly to the political truth that trumps the scientific truth.
By the way, I hope so, because
Me too.
one of the things, like when you run a company and, there's those that are complainers, and you can't give too much credit to complainers because they're everywhere. So these are the people that complain about everything. If a person complains about every single issue, they have this much credibility, right? But if a person who doesn't complain once a year, they say, hey, Pat, can I just bring something up? I don't like the way we do this here. You know what I do? I pay attention to what they have to say,
Right.
okay? So let's set aside the complainers that just complain about everything in life. What do we learn about people in America? Hey, this abortion thing, listen, it's legit. Kind of pay attention to it. It's very important to us. Check. Get it. Respect. Hey, this thing with COVID that ruined our lives. As a mother, I had to stay home and had to do this and had to cost my job. And I didn't want to take the vaccine, but I did take it and I had to do this. And I didn't like that part. Can you guys please not do this again and give me a different option the next time around? You know what? This is not a complainer. This is a positive citizen. They go to work, they raise their kids, they pay their taxes. Check, let's pay attention to this. All I'm saying is, let's pay attention to the people that are saying those things. Let's investigate that and give them an opportunity to see the opposing side.
Especially because there are going to be more pandemics. There are going to be more communicable diseases
I agree.
out there.
I agree.
And we need to know what works and what doesn't. And I think, you know, planning for future pandemics is what responsible government should
Crazy.
do.
Well, you heard it from him. Brace yourself. Here comes more pandemics. Yay. I thought that was a worthwhile conversation to dissect because it's important to recognize the signs of within a conversation, when you're having a crucial conversation, when you're having a conversation about something important with someone you disagree with, it is both difficult and important that you get it right. It's important that you find a way to present your perspective and that you are able to articulate that well. And it's important that you understand the other person's perspective. I'll give you a silly example. I was rewatching an old movie, one of the many Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan reboots. He wrote a whole series of novels around this character, Jack Ryan. And when they move him over to film, they swap out actors and they move the timeline and about who's, you know, where they are in their career and what's going on. Anytime you adapt a film, okay, you make things different. And in this instance, contrary to what was in the book, in The Sum of All Fears, you have Jack Ryan as like a junior intelligence analyst. And he's kind of thrown into the situation where there's an imminent nuclear confrontation between these two world powers. It's you know, dialed up to 11, as serious and time sensitive as it can get. And he has a chance where he gets a cabinet member on the phone and he's got crucial information that's going to change, possibly avert nuclear war. And he and this person on the cabinet, they've had a bit of personal beef earlier in the movie. They've argued, and basically the guy doesn't think that Jack Ryan knows what he's talking about. He thinks he's biased in favor of the Russians. So he doesn't really trust him. And it's fine screenwriting, and it's all too representative of human nature, which is why I'm talking about it. He gets him on the phone and he goes, who is this on the phone? He goes, it's Jack Ryan. And he goes, oh, the Russian apologist. Jack Ryan basically has time and patience from this person to say one thing. He has this crucial bit of information about where the plutonium in this attack came from. And if he set his pride aside and conveyed that truth, the whole conversation goes a different way. But instead, he feels like he has to win the argument first. And his response is to restate his position from earlier in the movie, where he's trying to relitigate that old conversation. And as soon as he does, you can just see all the patience from this cabinet member just leave him, and he just hangs up on him. Conversation's over. It's a crucial conversation. It's important. It's difficult. Okay. Now, a bit of an extreme circumstance, but how often do you have a conversation with your significant other, with your children, with a coworker or a boss or a customer, where you're realizing that you have to come to a meeting of the minds, where you guys are starting to get divergent, where you're starting to maybe have different core principles or feel like we need to move in a different direction, and there's tension in the relationship and there's strife, okay, that kind of low-level conflict. And you realize that you need to have one of these crucial conversations. When you're doing that, it's important to know your audience, to know the person that you're speaking to. And in this conversation, the reason why I brought it up, because again, this Jeffrey Toobin's not that important in the grand scheme of things. But what he represents is very important, because there are people who are very skilled at deflection and manipulation, shifting the conversation, changing the goalposts, changing the stakes. And unlike the luxury of what we have here in this kind of format, where we have all the time in the world to drill down and look at the back and forth and see the way the conversation flows, in a live conversation, you don't get that ability. You have only what you remember saying, only what you remember them saying. And if you, in a moment of passion, in a moment of frustration, if you restate or rehash an old argument, if you go back to defend your pride, if you go back and you just want to win the conversation, or conversely, if you're dealing with someone who is not acting in good faith, someone who the moment you misstate something, the moment you give them an opening, they're going to seize that opening and run a non-productive direction with the conversation. Both of those outcomes mean that the conversation failed. At the end of the day, isn't the goal of conversations like this to improve the situation, to come to a better understanding of each other, to gain in respect and trust, so that you can continue and improve your working relationship together? Isn't that the goal? Isn't that important? When it comes to the person you're raising your children with, when it comes to the person who feeds your family because that's where your paycheck comes from, when it comes to landing a prospective client, when it comes to hashing out political differences with a sibling, with a child, with a parent, these are important conversations. And these are conversations, frankly, that as American citizens, I don't think we're very well equipped to have. A lot of us have never gotten formal training and have not had the opportunity or the misfortune to receive a lot of informal training or experience in needing to have these conversations. And yet, we can't avoid them. They're part of the human condition. And so what we end up doing is failing these conversations and making, in many cases, a bad situation and making it worse. The simple truth is, setting aside abuse, infidelity, addiction, etc., setting aside some of these kind of major behavioral faults, where it's time for a parting of the ways. How many relationships, how many marriages fall apart because one spouse fails to engage the other spouse in a crucial conversation in a timely manner? Maybe it has to do with the way you raise your children, and you and your spouse bicker and fight and kind of dance around each other, and you never resolve this, but you have a disagreement with how to raise the child. And eventually it sows seeds of division in your relationship and you split apart. Well, now you have the same disagreements that you had before in a relationship that is fractured, in a relationship where you have less leverage over the other person than you did when you were married. You had a bad situation, and the divorce makes that bad situation even harder. Take it a few more years down the road, maybe you've remarried, maybe your spouse is remarried. So now you have 4 people in this conversation instead of 2. Way more opportunity for confusion, distraction, disruption, problems. And you have less leverage over each other because your relationship is fractured. And the child is probably getting sick and tired of being pulled and used as a pawn in this ongoing power struggle. So the child is less trusting of either of you and of both of you collectively because you're not even on the same page. They don't know how to deal with you. So they go shields up and they are less able to be influenced by you. How is that better? It's not. But the only way to avoid that is further upstream. Have the crucial conversation. Confront the issue in a productive way and find a way to come together to gain trust and respect for each other so that you can find an agreeable solution and maintain that civil society within your household. That's the point of these videos, is to drill down and understand that this is something we need to do and this is something we're bad at, and that our lives will be materially better if we learn how to do this. So that's why I dig into these. They won't always be political. If I find good material for... The reason I choose political is because it's kind of a common touchstone for principles that are common to the human experience. If you get down into relationship drama, in a lot of contexts, you're going to end up in a situation where it's either a he said, she said thing. There's no real objective standard to measure back to, or it's just irrelevant, or it becomes a question of personality. Whose personality do you like better? That's one you want to trust, whatever. But let me know if there are in particular conversations that come across your mind. I'd love to analyze them. And as always, good luck out there.